August 27, 1943. Yokosuka Naval Base, Japan. The humid air hung heavy over Tokyo Bay, thick with the scent of oil, salt, and iron. Along the pier, a small group of Imperial Japanese Navy officers stood in silence, their eyes fixed on a classified set of aerial reconnaissance photos freshly delivered from a submarine returning across the Pacific. Commander Hiroshi Tanaka adjusted his cap and leaned closer, his gloved finger tracing the dark outline of a massive ship docked at Norfolk Naval Shipyard. "Impossible," he muttered, barely audible above the whir of nearby cranes. "They can't be building them that fast." Beside him, Captain Satoru Nagumo, cousin of the famous Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, studied the image. The carrier in the photograph dwarfed anything the Imperial Navy could dream of producing now. "Essex class," he said flatly. "Another one." His tone carried no admiration, only a grim acceptance. In the distance, the faint sound of hammering echoed across the harbor. Japanese workers toiling on the unfinished carrier Shinano, itself a desperate conversion of the Yamato's sister hull. But even that colossal ship, once completed, would stand alone against an oncoming tide of American giants. Tanaka turned toward the gray horizon, his mind replaying memories from just 2 years earlier, December 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor had been Japan's proudest moment, their strike force of 6 fleet carriers, the mightiest concentration of naval aviation power the world had ever seen. They believed, deeply, that America would crumble under the weight of shock and humiliation. But now, less than 2 years later, Japan's optimism was evaporating like the morning mist over the bay. The photos told a story that no propaganda could silence. The United States was producing aircraft carriers faster than Japan could repair its damaged ones, let alone build new ones. Commander Tanaka picked up another photograph, this one showing rows of half-completed carriers lined up like assembly line products, surrounded by towering cranes and thousands of workers. The Essex class. Each ship over 800 feet long, capable of carrying nearly 100 aircraft and bristling with anti-aircraft guns. "How many do they have now?" he asked quietly. Nagumo sighed, adjusting his tunic. "Intelligence says 15 under construction, perhaps more." 15? Tanaka blinked, stunned. "We have 2 being built, maybe 3. 2, Nagumo corrected, and both behind schedule. The sound of a distant thunderstorm rolled over the bay. For a moment, neither man spoke. Around them, the war still felt abstract, a series of telegrams, communiques, and censored reports. But these photos, these cold, undeniable images, revealed something far more terrifying than any single battle. It was the sound of an empire running out of time. As Nagumo rolled up the photographs, his hands trembled slightly. "We used to laugh," he said bitterly, "at their decadence, their love of comfort, their Coca-Cola and jazz. But this," he tapped the paper, "this is industrial warfare. Machines building machines." Tanaka stared once more at the blurred American carrier in the image, its deck lined with Hellcats and Avengers, its island tower rising like a steel fortress. "And each one of these," he whispered, "can strike an entire island chain." Outside, the rising sun broke through the storm clouds, its reflection glinting across the water like the dying ember of an empire that had burned too bright, too fast. At that moment, deep within the heart of Japan's naval command, realization dawned. They were no longer fighting sailors. They were fighting factories. September 1943, Newport News Shipbuilding, Virginia. Steam hissed, steel clanged, and the air shimmered with the heat of 100 torches. The night shift had just begun, but the yards never slept. Not here, not anymore. Under the glow of floodlights, sparks rained down like fireworks as welders joined the ribs of another Essex-class hull, the rhythmic pounding of riveters echoing across the James River. Men and women worked shoulder to shoulder. Veterans of the Depression turned shipwrights overnight, farm boys beside engineers, housewives beside former dockhands. They worked without pause, through blizzards and heat waves, spurred by a single conviction: to end the war as quickly as possible. At the center of the yard stood USS Intrepid, CV-11, one of the newest carriers of the Essex Line, her deck freshly painted, her engines roaring to life for sea trials. To an outsider, the pace seemed inhuman. To the Americans, it was normal. Each Essex-class carrier was a marvel of mass production, designed not just for power but for speed of construction. The U.S. Navy and industry had devised modular building techniques, splitting the hulls into prefabricated sections that could be assembled simultaneously in multiple locations before being welded together. This wasn't shipbuilding as Japan understood it. This was assembly line warfare. Every week, more hulls rose from the slipways: Bunker Hill, Bennington, Hornet, Ticonderoga. Names that would soon thunder across the Pacific. From Norfolk to Brooklyn, San Francisco to Puget Sound, the tempo was relentless. And behind it all, rows of Liberty ships, destroyer escorts, oilers, and troop carriers rolled out in parallel, each one a cog in the vast logistical engine of total war. A foreman shouted over the din, his voice barely audible: "Shift change in 10. Keep that beam straight. She's got to sail in 60 days." 60 days. That was all it took for America to build what Japan took a year or more. The Imperial Navy had once prided itself on craftsmanship, meticulous joinery, precision riveting, and perfection in every detail. But the war had shifted the equation. Perfection no longer mattered. Quantity did. Every completed carrier meant another mobile airfield, a floating city that could deliver death hundreds of miles away. Each one carried nearly 3,000 crew, 90 to 100 aircraft, and enough supplies to operate independently for months. When the first photos of these steel behemoths reached Tokyo, officers like Tanaka and Nagumo saw more than just ships. They saw inevitability. Back in Japan, the workforce was exhausted, resources were dwindling, aluminum and oil were scarce, skilled labor was being drafted. Their shipyards were under constant threat from American bombers. And even as Japan struggled to finish Taiho, their one truly modern carrier, the U.S. was already launching another Essex every few weeks. The scale was incomprehensible. At Pearl Harbor, Japan had attacked 6 carriers. By mid-1944, America would field 24. Even Admiral Yamamoto, before his death in 1943, had foreseen this. He had warned his government, "I can run wild for 6 months. After that, I have no expectation of success." He knew Japan could win battles, but not the war of factories. And now, the prophecy was unfolding in glowing forges and hammering yards across the American coast. As Intrepid slid into the water that September night, cheers erupted from the workers, a human chorus of pride, sweat, and steel. Somewhere across the Pacific, Japan's once invincible fleet was shrinking, ship by ship, under the relentless tide of this industrial miracle. The world had never seen such a transformation. A nation turning its immense industrial might into a weapon of unstoppable momentum. for Japan's officers watching from afar. It wasn't just shocking, it was terrifying. June 19, 1944, Philippine Sea. The dawn sky was pale blue, streaked with thin clouds and the rising glow of the eastern sun. Below, the Imperial Japanese Navy's carrier force cut through calm waters. Zuikaku, Shokaku, Taiho, and several light carriers, all that remained of Japan's once mighty striking arm. On Zuikaku's flight deck, air crews hurried to arm their aircraft. A6M0s, D4Y Judy dive bombers, and B6N Jill torpedo planes. The engine screamed to life, the scent of gasoline thick in the air. Commander Tanaka, now assigned to the 1st Carrier Division, watched from the bridge as the first wave prepared for launch. He gripped the railing, his knuckles white. Intelligence reports suggested the American fleet was nearby, perhaps 200 miles east, but the full truth was far worse than anyone on board realized. Across the horizon, beyond the limit of Japanese radar, an armada unlike anything in history waited. 15 American carriers, most of them Essex-class, formed a vast wall of steel and aviation power. Around them steamed battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and oilers, stretching to the edge of sight. Each carrier deck swarmed with aircraft, hundreds of Hellcats, Helldivers, and Avengers, lined wing to wing, engines snarling in unison. They were part of Task Force 58, the most powerful naval strike force ever assembled. When the first Japanese planes lifted off that morning, the odds were already hopeless. From his observation point, Tanaka could see the shimmering silhouettes of Zeros disappearing into the sunlight, vanishing toward the horizon like ghosts. The radio crackled constantly with tense voices, pilots calling bearings, air control giving coordinates, static cutting through each transmission. And then, within an hour, the first reports came back, chaotic, fragmented. Enemy, too many. Hellcats everywhere, can't break through. Bombers down, they're slaughtering us. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, as the Americans would later call it, began. From the decks of the Essex-class carriers, Enterprise, Yorktown, Bunker Hill, Lexington, Hornet, and more, squadrons of F-6F Hellcats intercepted Japan's waves of attackers long before they could approach. The sky turned into a brutal dance of fire and falling metal. Within hours, over 300 Japanese aircraft were destroyed. Tanaka stood frozen as burning planes began splashing into the sea, black smoke curling into the wind. Somewhere aft, a lookout shouted, "Tai-ho hit! Torpedo strike!" The pride of Japan's carrier fleet, its newest, most advanced ship, had been fatally breached by a single American submarine. Gasoline fumes ignited hours later, turning her into a floating inferno. By sunset, Shokaku too was gone, struck by torpedoes from USS Kavala. Only Zuikaku survived the day. That night, Tanaka walked the flight deck in silence. Around him, the sea was littered with oil slicks, burning wreckage, and the dim glow of distant fires. He could still smell the acrid stench of aviation fuel and scorched paint. He remembered the photographs from Yokosuka, those vast American carriers lined up like a steel forest. He now realized what they meant. The Americans didn't need luck anymore. They had production. Each time Japan lost a carrier, America already had another one ready to replace it, faster, stronger, and more efficient. In just 2 years, the tables had completely turned. The hunter had become the hunted. Tanaka looked up into the empty night sky, where once the proud formations of the Kido Butai had roared in victory. Now there was only silence, broken by the gentle hum of distant engines, American patrols sweeping the dark ocean. He whispered under his breath, "We built ships for glory. They built ships for victory." And in that moment, surrounded by ruin, he understood the war had been decided not by admirals or tactics, but by the thunder of factories an ocean away. April 7, 1945. East China Sea. Rain slashed across the gray water as the giant battleship Yamato surged north, her bow cutting through swells like a blade. Aboard the world's largest battleship, 3,000 sailors stood ready, though few truly believed they were coming back. The mission was suicide: to reach Okinawa and beach herself as a stationary fortress, defending the island with her remaining guns. In the wardroom, Commander Hiroshi Tanaka, transferred again after Zukaku's sinking, sat silently as the engines rumbled beneath him. He'd seen this pattern too many times, desperation masquerading as duty. The Imperial Navy, once a symbol of precision and dominance, was now sailing to its death. Across the ocean, the enemy waited, not with one fleet, but with waves of them. 15 Essex-class carriers again, joined by light carriers, battleships, and destroyers. A mobile sky, a floating continent of power. As dawn broke, lookouts shouted warnings, aircraft approaching from the east, dozens, then hundreds. The sky filled with the roar of American planes, Hellcats, Helldivers, Avengers, their engines forming a single thunderous hum. They came from Bennington, Essex, Bunker Hill, Hancock, San Jacinto, and more, a swarm of metal locusts descending on the last pride of the Imperial Navy. Tanaka raced topside as the first bomb struck. The deck convulsed under his boots, flames erupting near the aft turret. The invincible Yamato, 72,000 tons of steel, was helpless beneath the rain of American firepower. Her anti-aircraft guns blazed wildly, tracers streaking through the sky, but the attackers just kept coming. Within minutes, torpedoes ripped into her sides. The ship listed, shuddering under the shock. One officer screamed orders drowned by explosions. The deck tilted, and sailors slid into the rising sea. From above, the American pilots could scarcely believe what they were seeing: a leviathan of steel being torn apart by aircraft launched from a fleet so vast it stretched across the horizon. The Yamato exploded in a blinding column of flame and smoke, the shock wave rippling across the sea. When the fireball faded, Japan's naval heart was gone. The Empire's great gamble, its vision of dominance through craftsmanship, courage, and steel, had been shattered by a single truth: industrial capacity wins wars. Back in Tokyo, Captain Nagumo received the final report. He said nothing. He simply closed his eyes, laid the message on his desk, and whispered a quiet prayer for the men who had gone down with their ships. He remembered the laughter of his fellow officers years ago, when someone had mentioned that Americans built for comfort, not for war. He could almost hear their voices echoing through time. The irony was unbearable. By the summer of 1945, Japan's surviving naval vessels were rusting in harbors, unable to move for lack of fuel. American carrier groups, meanwhile, roamed freely across the Pacific, striking with impunity, launching hundreds of sorties a day, each ship supported by a web of logistics Japan could never match. The Essex class had become more than just ships. They were symbols, floating factories of power, each one a manifestation of America's relentless efficiency. Where Japan built ships as masterpieces, America built them as systems: replaceable, repeatable, unstoppable.